Hi, I want to have a chat to you today about improving your SFS, your student satisfaction. But more importantly, we're not just talking about the score. We're talking about your students' experience. How valuable is this learning experience for them? Now, you will bump into the student satisfaction score every single semester because you're going to get feedback on either your teaching, so your SFT, or your SFS for the subject. But underlying that is how can we use this tool, this student satisfaction tool, which is kind of a few questions, how can we use this to continue to improve the student experience within subjects? So I want to run you through a couple of ideas, and then I'm going to give you a bit of a framework for thinking about how you can improve it. This is not something you can do overnight. This is something that we have to be thinking about continuously. Every single time we step into a classroom, every time we engage with students, every time we develop subjects. It's absolutely central to what we do. Let's get into it. Okay, so there are three ways to think about the SFS. The first way is that the SFS is the perfect assessment of student engagement. Now, you will have come across this. This is often the what it feels like when someone tells us that we've got a poor SFS. They say to us, look, your SFS is below par, and there's this kind of underlying assumption that if you've got a poor SFS, you must be a terrible teacher. So on the one hand, we've got this idea that the SFS is perfect. It's not, but it's not absolutely terrible. It has benefits. So the other option is that right at the other extreme, and I've heard this one, that it's intolerably inaccurate and designed to get you fired. I know this seems funny, but we regularly discount the score on the SFS if we don't like the score that it gives us. So we'll kind of go, the SFS, that's a pointless score. I'm just going to ignore it. Whereas in actual fact, there might be some truths in there that we perhaps, though they're a bit of pill, we perhaps need to pay attention to. Okay, so this is right at the other end. So on the one hand, you've got perfect. I question that. It's not perfect. How could you possibly perfectly assess the student experience with a few questions? You can't, but we also know that we can't ask students more questions. It's hard enough to get them to answer the questions in the first place. But it's also not entirely useless. So it is built on a rich foundation of research. You can actively use the SFS score and the SFT score to improve the student experience in a way that improves learning outcomes. Really important to remember. So the way I like to think of the SFS is it's like using an axe to cut a cake. It will work. You can cut a cake with an axe. It will cut it into pieces. You could probably divide it up amongst a lot of people, but the reality is it's going to be rough. Now, if it's the only tool you've got, use it by all means. But it's rough, but that's okay because it still does the job, okay? So the thing we need to realize about the SFS is that there's a backstory. So many, many moons ago, some people would suggest that maybe this was the best way to go. The academic was king. So whatever the academic said, the students had to obey. They weren't accountable for the work that the academic wasn't accountable for the way that they presented material. They were just there to teach. They had students at their feet. They would do what they were told. And it was basically between the student and the academic. And to a certain extent, that was fine. If you chose to kind of sit at the feet of an academic, well, then you were choosing to kind of buy into that. But as the education system grew, all of a sudden, we've got lots and lots of people coming into education. And that is government subsidized. So as a community, we are actually paying for students to go through university. And we do this because there are huge benefits associated with having a broader cross-section of the community go through that educational experience. So there are benefits associated, we're assuming. But the government looks at that and they go, well, in the community as a whole, they go, well, hold on a minute, it's all well and good to have the academic at the center, but maybe we can't trust them all. Maybe they're not necessarily capable of checking whether or not the students have learnt well. Some of us are, some of us aren't. Some of us are great at one thing, but not necessarily great at another. And they said, okay, how are we going to make sure, if we're going to pay millions and millions of dollars for lots of people to go through the educational experience, how do we make sure that we get value? And so they said, okay, let's create some transparency. And so they started getting students to rate the course experience so that that information could be fed back to new students and create a transparency. And what that did is it meant that new students could compare apples with apples. So they could go and have a look and they could go, oh, you know, this university, students are walking away from this saying it's really, really beneficial, and yet students were walking away from this university saying perhaps it's not. And so yes, it kind of shifts it to this market-driven approach, and we can be cynical about that, but what it does do is it puts some power back in the hands of the student, which is actually really good. And so they came up with, these kind of rating systems that are theory-driven. We've got limited capacity to kind of ask students questions. It would be great to give them 150, question survey and really, really dig in, but we have limited capacity. And so with a few questions, how is it that we capture whether a course is good? And so universities, in response to that, in the hope of making sure that by the time a student gets to the end of their course, that they're happy with their experience, this is not just about satisfied, but that their experience was worthwhile, have implemented lots of different kind of surveys throughout the year. And at La Trobe, it's the student satisfaction. And so these surveys are designed to give us information so that we know how the student is going. So we don't want to think about the student satisfaction as entirely useless and designed to get us fired. At the same time, let's not be overly confident and say that the feedback is exactly capturing the learning experience. We have to use a bit of wisdom there. It sits in the middle. So it's about saying, okay, how can we pay attention to the right things? How can we adjust our learning experiences so that the student experience improves in terms of their learning? And that's really, really central. We're not just looking for happy students, we're looking for students who've grown and changed and learnt new things in a way that changes the later student feedback. So we've got these dual pressures. On the one hand, we've got the survey. So we want it to look like things are going well. And sometimes it feels like that is in total contrast for things to actually be going well. I have had academics say to me, oh, but if I push them too hard, then my student satisfaction is going to go down. It's not actually true, but there's this perception that sometimes the competing needs of the survey and the student learning experience are kind of counterbalancing one another. Okay, so we've got this real contrast. But really, when you get down to it, what we're chasing, the true goal is getting students to work harder and like it. It's okay for them to enjoy the university experience. It's not about being easy. University should be inherently difficult. But it's about getting them to work harder and really like it. Now, this process of drawing students through a learning experience is actually very, very similar to me trying to convince you to come on a cycling trip with me. Some of you are thinking, why the hell would I do that? And that's exactly right. We're actually trying to get students to work incredibly hard. We're putting them in a situation where they're going to be stressed, where they're going to feel stupid sometimes, and we've got to draw them through that process so that they enjoy it. And so this parallel is a really useful way of thinking about the student experience. So, if I was going to convince you, we've got the Brad's cycle touring where the suffering never ends. Now there's truth in that. The university experience, yes, it should be rich, yes, it should be valuable, but it is also going to be tough. So I'm going to try and convince you today that you should come. So, selling the journey. I'll tell you about my cycling trip. It's 1,200K. I did this trip last year. You start at Christchurch, you work around, you're going to go up this really big hill in Arthur's Pass. It's going to hurt really bad, so you better make sure you train up. But then you're going to fly down the other side, you'll see glaciers, and then you'll have another big hill. Now see, what I'm doing here is I'm saying I'm going to tell you where we're starting. We're starting in Christchurch. But we're also going to end in Christchurch. And I might tell you there's a great hotel there or things like that, but I'm highlighting the difficult points along the route. I'm not saying this trip is going to be easy. I'm not saying this trip is going to be fun. I'm saying it's going to hurt, but there are moments along the way that are amazing. And so when you're developing a subject, when you're selling a subject, and we have to sell the subject as a journey all the way through, we actually need to connect it to the student's long-term goals. What is it that a student's trying to do? Where are they going? Not our goals. I want students to be great. I want them to work hard. I want them to do all of that. But what do they want to be? And how does your subject relate to that? Now, in some instances, that's much easier than others. But somehow we have to connect the work of this subject to their long-term goals. But also, let's be realistic that most of us have long-term goals that we'll probably never achieve. But short-term goals, however, we're more likely to achieve. So what are the short-term goals for the student? A lot of these relate to the assessment. But there are other ways of having short-term goals. They might want to see an improvement in skills or things like that. So when you're selling the journey, and you do have to sell it right from the beginning to the end, how is it that you're connecting the subject, the work, the difficult bit, with the long and short-term goals. So I'm going to tell you that we've got a big hill, but the view is amazing from the top. I'm going to tell you that the weather's going to be bad, but then you're going to have these beautiful crystal clear days. So I'm not lying to you about the struggle, but I am saying, look, the struggle will be worthwhile, okay? And that is what makes it fun. The fact that there's just as much payoff as there is cost. Okay, surviving the journey. This is my bike. I'm going to provide you with a bike, and the bike, it's got panniers because the weather in New Zealand is terrible, and some great gears because the hills are really steep. It's got a water bottle. You're going to need that. There are some hot days. Helmet just in case you crash. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying I'm not sending you on a cycling tour on your own clunky bike with no gears. I'm actually offering you the tools required to get you from A to B. Not comfortably, it's going to hurt, but the right tools. So I'm telling you about the gears, and in the instance of the subject, think, what is it that my students need? What are the tools that they need? And this might be knowledge type tools, how to do something. What are the tools that they need in order to get where I want them to go? And we need to tell them what they're for. So I told you about the gears, but I told you about the gears in the context of the hill. So it's all well and good to give students a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of tools, but unless you tell them what they're for and unless you sell them and kind of really, share with them, okay, these are what the tools are for and this is what it will help you achieve, then they're going to really struggle to kind of get their head around it. So have a think about your subject, think about, okay, what are the tools? And sometimes the tools are just simply a matter of, okay, how do you edit a video for a video assessment? Or how is it that you write a really good quality essay? Or how do you learn grammar when you don't know it? How do what are the tools that your students would benefit from that they need in order to, get through the whole trip? Sharing the journey. Now, I have a friend, and he is a great friend, but in terms of sharing the journey, it's lucky I'm a little bit tough because that's him way up there in the distance. He's a great friend, but he won't stay with me on the hills. He travels off into the distance. He doesn't really offer any assistance. It's every man for himself, and we wouldn't have it any other way because we've done this thing quite a bit. But he will do this thing where you get to the top of the hill and I'll be exhausted and he'll be sitting there with a smile on his face. I'll get to the top of the hill and he's gotten there 10 minutes ago. He's, oh, that wasn't so hard. Sometimes this is us in a subject when we're teaching. We're not actually sharing the journey with our students. We're just telling them what to do all the time. The best feedback I ever got with regard to tutoring was stop telling me how easy it is because my experience says that it's not easy and you saying that makes me feel really stupid. And it just blew me away. I thought, you're absolutely right. I'm saying it's easy in the hope of encouraging them that they can do it. But in actual fact, it's not easy. It's really, really hard. And when I told them it was easy, then they thought they were the odd ones out. So how is it, think in your subjects, how is it that you can share the journey with your students and acknowledge the human? Okay, so some of your students don't do very well, and sometimes we like to assume that it's because they don't put effort in, but it's not always the case. So how is it that you can connect with your students and let them know that you're there to ride through this along beside them? What ways are you going to support them? How are you going to make yourself available to your students at that really human level of I'm struggling and I don't know what to do? Really important. We are dealing with humans. Enjoying the journey. This might come as a surprise, but what we actually want is for our students to enjoy traveling through a subject. Now, some of you are thinking there's not a hope in hell that I would be able to enjoy a cycling trip. I beg to differ, because what I'm going to tell you is that, on night, I can't remember what night, but we're going to get to this stream and we're going to camp in between those two trees. It's a gorgeous little spot, the river running by. And we're going to have a moment just to reflect on where we've come from and what we've achieved. I'm going to tell you that sometimes when you're flying downhill after going uphill, you feel totally alive because you've struggled for so long that flying downhill is just this amazing relief. I'll tell you that the food tastes amazing, even if it's not amazing because you're on the road all the time and you're starving. Sometimes what we forget when we're teaching subjects is how do we provide moments for them to celebrate their learning and to enjoy the journey. If you think about the learning experience, the only feedback they get really is constructive criticism. They don't actually get moments to go, you know what, I know a lot more now than I did before. So think in the context of your subject, how can I provide opportunities for enjoyment? Now that might be reflecting on achievement, but it might also just be a little bit of fun. So creating activities that really get them to think, but are also a good laugh or really rich conversations or connection with other people. How is it that you can get your students to enjoy the work that they're doing? It's really, really important. If we didn't enjoy our jobs, we wouldn't do it for very long. Not to say we're not working hard, we're working really hard, but I love it. We want the same thing for our students. We want them to work hard and love it, really enjoy it. Remembering the journey. This is me, the top of a mountain, big smile on my face because I had been suffering all day. The interesting thing about cycling trips is that what happens is one day after you've finished, it's like, yeah, we did a cycling trip. There were some hills. And then a week after, it's like, oh, those hills, they were huge, but geez, it felt good at the end. And then the stories seem to get bigger as you reflect and you think about the cost and the payoff. So we remember that journey and that process as something really, really rich. Now, we don't often do this with students. We don't often give them the opportunity to kind of look back at their education at the course level or even at the subject level and go, you know what, when you first started this, you couldn't construct a full sentence, but now you can. Smile about it. That's a big achievement. So how is it that we get students to remember where they've come from? How do we fit this subject within the context of the broader course so that they can look back at the end of a semester and go, wow, that was hard work, but I know this and I know this and I'm more capable of doing this and I'm closer to my goal. I'm closer to getting to the end. Did it pay off? Did the effort pay off? Do I benefit from this in the long run? Can I see a connection between the hard work that I've done and where I'm going, my long-term goals? Really, really important. Okay, now, those are the basic principles that I would apply to a subject to develop them and improve your student satisfaction. And they will have a relationship to the feedback, assuming that people are answering your questions. Now, there are a couple of tips, not many, but if you do these, your feedback will go up. Sometimes we're in a situation where we don't get the feedback at the right time and you need to chase that up with various different people, but if your students are getting their feedback survey at a point in the semester where they are actually still doing the subject, the key ways, the most important way is to embed that into an activity. So if you're face-to-face, say to them, okay, first 10 minutes of class, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to complete the survey. Go to your email box, complete the survey for me. That's really, really important. Same with an online activity. You can actually embed it in a lesson where you do activity 1, 2, and 3, and then activity 4 is okay, go away and complete the survey, and then activity 5 is yes, I completed it, no, I didn't, and then you move on. Identify what it is that you changed from the previous year. So the reality is that generally students won't benefit from the feedback that they give your subject because they've already finished it. But if you tell the stories of, okay, last year I got some amazing feedback and I was able to do this, and these are the things that you're talking about being good now, then you're kind of highlighting to them the benefit of the feedback process. The other thing is tell them why you need it. So it's okay to tell your students that, look, one of the best ways that I have of improving my teaching and my subject development, curriculum development, is the feedback that you give me. It's hugely important to me. I actually really, really look forward to it. So they will do things for you because they want you to go okay. If you've developed that relationship, they're going to be keen to help you out by giving you some feedback. The other one is an email reminder. You've got to be a little bit cautious about over-emailing your students, but sometimes it's okay to kind of tell your students, hey, don't forget, you've got the feedback. This feedback is, again, really important. This is why we do it. We know that, it's a struggle sometimes, but it's really important to us. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Most important thing is think about what are the ways that you can sell that journey? What are the tools that you can give the students? How can you kind of hand them the students and say, here, this wrench is for this. This is what we're using this for. How can you walk with the students? How can you actually share that journey so that your students feel connected to a real person, not just a system? Whether you're teaching in the class or running a subject, how do you connect to them and walk beside them and say, hey, we're here to get you through this. That's our job. And then how do you help them enjoy it? We need to have fun. at work or play, you know, we need to enjoy it. And how do you help them look back and go, wow, the effort was actually worth it? You know, that this is what I've gained, this is the knowledge I've gained, and this is how it relates to my long-term goals. If you apply those principles all the time, your SFS will improve. And more importantly than your SFS is that your student experience will improve, that they will learn more and engage deeper, they'll enjoy themselves more, and they'll look back on it and go, wow, geez, that hurt. It was hard, but it was really beneficial. I hope this is helpful. I look forward to hearing about the different things that you've tried and implemented, and you know, whether this was valuable for you or not. Thanks. Catch you next time.